The world looks to California to answer the hard questions, for redemption, to introduce the unfamiliar, to be resilient. Because California bounces back, holds us accountable, values who we are, remains vigilant, defies those in our way, and stands for community. Here on the West Coast, we're at the center of it all. Los Angeles Times, the state of what's next.
Hi, I'm Howard Blume.
And I'm Paloma Esquivel. We're education reporters for the LA Times. We're here for the Times' Ask a Reporter series. We're here to answer your questions about education.
And here's how it will work. We've already received a lot of questions in advance, and we're going to try to get through a lot of them. I will read the question, and Paloma will either take that on or pass it back to me, and we might pass some things back and forth. We're not going to dodge questions, but there definitely will be questions we do not know the answers to. I can tell you that already. Some of you out there will type in questions and make comments as we do this. That's great. Go for it. Now, we cannot see that during the broadcast. Still, the production team will gather up some of those questions that you're typing in live and send them to me by text, and we'll try to get to some of those as well. That way, you can get some of your questions answered in real time. The goal is to get to as many questions as we can, so we are going to get started. Within reason and bounds of decency, I'm going to read your questions just as you have worded them. So one question that came in to me via Twitter from Raymond Maxwell is, will students attending virtual education be graded on their performance?
Yeah, so that's a great question. There were a lot of changes that happened in the spring when schools shut down, and a lot of schools ended up dropping their grading requirements or making it so that students couldn't get worse grades or couldn't fail their classes in recognition of this sort of moment of crisis that students and teachers and school districts were in. But that is changing going into the fall. There are stricter requirements. Schools are going to be required to take attendance, to provide more rigorous online learning, and grading will also be a part of that. Howard, I don't know if you have any more sort of detailed information about that.
I think that pretty much answers it. I mean, basically, we were trying to do school again. There was an emphasis on compassion rather than rigor to some degree in the spring, but we can't stay out of school as we know it forever. So it's school, and school has grading. They're also going to try to do assessments and figure out how far behind kids are and what they need to catch up. So yeah, they will be graded on their performance, and there'll be other types of assessments besides grades just to see where kids are and what help they need. Now, the next question is from Mr. Fahrenheit 200 degrees. And I'm reading, my question, why the heck are kids not in class? I've cleaned up that language a little bit. So Paloma, why the heck are kids not in class?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very good question. And I think the answers are complex. There's so many factors. We know that a lot of students didn't have computers to access their classes when school went online. We know that a lot of students didn't have internet access. We know that that's still the case. State officials recently said that I think something like there's still a need for something like 1 million computers and hotspots so that students can just take the step of accessing their classes. So that's a big factor. The other factor is students being at home without support, parents working, having difficult situations at home, crowded conditions that make it impossible. You have kids who are taking care of their siblings. So there are lots of really, really complicated reasons why students aren't attending classes. And part of that is also has to do with the answer to the previous question, right? When districts dropped grading requirements, then the motivation for a lot of students probably wasn't there. Why participate if you're going to still get the same grade that you got in the previous quarter? So that's part of the factor, but I think a lot of it has to do with also just this moment of crisis that everyone is in, that everyone is dealing with, and that makes it much, much more difficult for students to engage with school than it was when you could just go in person and show up.
Well, and if we want to take that question more literally, why are kids not in school? I think not to be dismissive, but I think there are health reasons. I mean, what Paloma was pointing out is that there are a million reasons why kids should be in school. These kids, the bottom line is, education is not being provided as well without there being a class to go to, without there being a campus to go to. So everybody wants to get back to that. And we're still in a position where the public health authorities think that that consideration on balance is not outweighed by the public safety considerations. And I know that there's a lot of disagreement out there on that, but we've talked to a lot of public health experts, and it does seem that on balance, there's broad support for the idea that it might not be safe to open schools in areas where the disease transmission is high, where the positive test rate is high, where the community transmission rate is out of control and they can't do effective testing and contact tracing. And all of those conditions apply to most of California. And certainly it may be easier to start school with the younger children, and we might be able to get into that later. But I mean, that's literally the answer to your question, but you probably knew that already. But we can tell you, we speak to epidemiologists, and I think it's fair to say that on balance, they are pretty supportive of the decision to keep the schools closed at the moment, even with the harms. And yes, there are exceptions to that because nobody always agrees on anything. All right, next question. What are the major differences in approach to reopening the public school and private school systems, and how do charter schools play into that? And that question is from Brian James Ariano. Well, I'll start with that one, I guess. It's probably easier for a private school or a charter school to reopen because there's less bureaucracy. They may not have a union or multiple unions to deal with and to negotiate with in this process. But in fact, as long as these public health orders remain in place, which cover most of the counties in California, and we've estimated about, actually the state has estimated, covering about 97% of students, public schools and private schools will have to remain closed. So in that sense, there's no difference in when you can reopen. Now, as far as when conditions change and you're able to reopen, it may be easier for private schools to reopen. They may have more resources, although there are some private schools that are struggling financially as well, of course. Charter schools, they have their own board of directors. So in a certain way, their bureaucracy is smaller, so they can maybe reach those decisions more simply and quickly. But there are broad health conditions that apply to all the schools, but within that, there are probably some differences. And I guess that's a quick answer to that question. Here is a kind of a little bit different question. And I'm asking this because we want to be able to take on just about all questions. So here it is. It's from Eva Montalegre. I'm sure I butchered the pronunciation of your name, and that will happen repeatedly, I'm sure. But here's the question. Do you have relationships with cops that are close, affectionate? Is there a camaraderie, or do you feel mostly at odds? Are you ever asked to slant a story to help an investigation? Paloma, why don't you take a stab at that?
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't quite have to do with the topic at hand of education, although somewhat related, because there are cops in schools, and that's something that the LA Times has written a lot about. For me personally, and I do think that that's an important and fair question that a lot of people are asking, right, about the relationship between journalists and law enforcement. And there's a lot of real important sort of conversations going on about those relationships. So yeah, I'd say for me, I try to approach my job as a professional, and I try to approach everybody I talk to as a professional. So I'm not sort of trying to have very close personal relationships with anybody that I'm working with on a story. And I also have that sort of reporter's skepticism about everybody, be it law enforcement or any other official or any person on the street. I sort of try to approach everybody with a little bit of skepticism. Yeah, I guess I'd also say I do think there has been a lot of conversation about whether journalists have gone too far in terms of sort of deferring to what cops and law enforcement have to say. And I think that that's an important conversation that's happening right now. And I think there's a lot of pushback from journalists saying we have to treat law enforcement with the same level of skepticism as anybody else. And personally, I absolutely agree with that.
Well, that was a good answer. I'm going to take pieces of that. It was a great answer. Are you ever asked to slant a story to help an investigation? No. I mean, there's often vigorous disagreement in the newsroom over what the meaning of a story is and how strong we can push on it or pull back from it. And a lot of that is we're learning the facts about a story as we do our reporting. And people disagree. They have genuine professional disagreements over how hard to push or how to write that lead or how to sum up the story. And there's no, it's sometimes it's art as much as science, and we don't always get that right. But and believe me, readers let us know when they think we don't get it right. But it is something we care a lot about, not slanting an investigation. And sometimes we make those calls incorrectly, and I hope we try to fix it when we do. As far as relationships with cops, well, I mean, I know the police officers who I work, when I go to the school board meetings, there are police officers I see all the time. They're friendly to me. I'm friendly to them. I try to be friendly to everybody. I try to treat everybody with the same respect that I would treat the superintendent or U.S. senator, because I think all people are equally important. It's tricky because you'll be working with people for 10 or 15 years, say a school board member who's in office a long time, and you have a very strong collaborative relationship on some issues. And then you find out they've been doing something wrong that you have to write about, and they feel betrayed, like, I thought we were friends. And I said, well, we have a professional relationship, but that does not make you immune from scrutiny. I would not be doing my job if I gave you special treatment just because we get along with each other. And that's why in some ways, some people say journalists have no friends except other journalists. I think that's not quite right, but sometimes it feels that way because it is dangerous to get too close to a source for a story, because you may have to write about that source in a way that would challenge your objectivity otherwise, and it's very important to be able to do that. Okay, on to the next question. What percentage of high schools and colleges have access to e-learning? And there's a part 2 to that. This question is from Matt Coleman, but why don't we just answer that in pieces? So what percentage of high schools and colleges have access to e-learning? Paloma?
I guess if I'm understanding the question correctly, it's a question about whether the schools are able to provide the e-learning. So I believe that, as far as I know, the high schools and colleges, all of the ones that I know of and have talked to are able to do that. It's more a question of whether the students can access that on the other end. But that's sort of how I interpreted the question, but I don't know, Howard, if you have any other thoughts on that.
I actually read the question the same way. There's a secondary issue. You can have access to e-learning, but there's the question of how effective the e-learning is, because there's lots of products out there. Teachers have had varying levels of training in delivering this. The teachers in the school districts have not signed up to be distance learning specialists, and yet they've had to become them. I mean, it's hard enough to be a teacher under normal circumstances, and they've, to some degree, had to relearn the craft, and this is very difficult. But as far as everybody doing it, yeah, everybody's doing it. And another part of that question is, what is the standard health plan in terms of accessing school in the future and online education? Well, that's a little tricky. I mean, I think we've talked about that a little. Is there anything you want to add on that topic, Paloma?
I don't think so. I feel like you had a more detailed insight on that one.
All right, well, we've talked about that a little, and we'll talk about it in other ways. I think I'm going to go on to the next question. Is the bureaucracy of LA Unified influencing smaller districts across the U.S.? That's from Elisa Blesky, if I'm pronouncing that name right, which is unlikely. I mean, I guess I would say yes, it's the nation's second largest school district, and it probably should have some influence. So yes, and you can argue whether that influence is a good influence or a bad influence, but people do pay attention. The teachers in Oakland were looking at the agreement reached for distance learning with LA Unified, and they were wanting to model their own agreement on part of what was in the LA Unified agreement, for better or worse. So that is one thing. By the way, I got a text, since it's a segue, I think I'm going to pull up this question from my cell phone that came in live. Mayra Rebecca Zamora asked, what is your take on the tentative deal that was approved yesterday? A lot of parents, including myself, were dismayed at the lack of opportunity for parents to provide input prior to a finalized deal. Now, the deal being referred to in this case is the agreement over how teaching, how distance learning is going to be carried out in the spring. And she's talking about in the Los Angeles Unified School District. Now, I have to be careful here. I have to report all perspectives as fairly as I can. So I'm not going to offer my own take on this, whether it's good or bad. I reported in the story today different perspectives on this. I think it can be argued from a variety of perspectives. Now, as far as the lack of opportunity for parents to have input, I think that's a factual question. And I think the answer is parents did not have an opportunity for input. And I know that they want ongoing input in these committees, that these standing committees that have been set up by the district and the union as problems arise over distance learning. So I know that parents want a voice in that, and it is factually correct that parents have not really had a voice so far. Is there anything you want to add to that, Paloma?
No, I think you covered it.
All right. Now we have Olga Duran, who asks, is LA Unified continuing to pay all of its employees? And the answer, and then, she also asked, are layoffs anticipated? The answer to that is yes. They have received money from the state to pay all of their employees. Are layoffs anticipated? By and large, not for the current school year. However, there are some employees that have been laid off. It's possible they would have been laid off with or without the pandemic. And that mainly happened as a result of local funding decisions made at the school and the local district level. So some employees have been laid off. If you are a teacher, you are fairly well protected for the year because the legislature passed a budget which pretty much said no teacher layoffs. But some categories of employees are not protected. They only have to be given proper notice, which is in many cases 60 days. So there could be some layoffs. If you work for a private school, you are not protected. If you work for a charter school, theoretically, you should be largely protected unless you're in one of those unprotected categories of employees. So I guess that's kind of an answer for that one. Well, here is a question from Margot Manecki, and she wants to know, what kinds of stories are you most interested in telling during a time of distance learning? What would you say to that, Paloma?
It's hard because it's such a huge change in how, it's such a huge, massive change in our educational system. It's hard sometimes to even try to begin like wrapping our minds around it. And so the challenge there is like picking up all the little, small stories about different changes and different approaches and different things that are happening in the classroom, different things that teachers are experiencing, and then also trying to like step back and say like, what's the big picture here? What is the big picture impact on students, on families? So, this is definitely like, it's an exciting moment to sort of try to cover, but it's also very, very challenging just sort of in the massiveness of what's going on. And also in the differences from district to district, right? Because we have like 1,000 school districts in California and each one kind of makes decisions on their own. And so you're trying to grasp like how are things different from place to place. So all of that is very challenging. But for me in particular, I think the things that really drive me is looking at how is this affecting the most vulnerable students? How is this affecting those students that were already struggling? How's it affecting children from low-income families? How's it affecting Black and Latino kids who already have wide achievement gaps? Those are the things that I really, really want to make sure that we spend time focusing on and delving deep into, because I think they're really, really important.
That is a great answer. I guess all I would add is that we especially want to hear from people who are living this experience, because there's no magic to our reporting. We are truly only as good as our sources of information. And we need to hear voices from the ground, from the field. So if you are a student, if you are a parent, if you're a teacher, if you're a principal, even if you're a superintendent or a school board member, we want to hear from you. Now, I get hundreds of emails every day. I pretty much read them all. I don't miss many. And I don't respond to them all. I respond to many of them. But I try to, I benefit from them. And if there's something you really want to make sure I saw, you can send it to me more than once. But we actually want to hear from you, our sources in the field. And we also actually like your constructive criticism. I've learned a lot from your input. Some of our readers are absolutely insane, but a lot of them are not. And even some of the insane ones make good points from time to time. So we will go on now. How can we provide no-cost internet to students and their families? Ennis Kimberly has that question. Paloma, you want to take a stab at that?
I wish I had an answer to that question. I don't know how we can do it. I know that it's a huge issue, that there are communities all around California, especially in rural communities, where it's not even a matter of families being able to pay for the internet access. It's that they don't have, there is no carrier, there is no access. So, so how do their students get online? How do they do their classwork? It's a huge issue. I know that districts have been working on obtaining and getting and distributing hotspots to students, and there has been a lot of movement on that, but it still hasn't been enough to bridge that gap. So that the need is there. I wish I knew the answer to how to fix it. I don't know, Howard, do you have insights on that?
I don't have any magical solutions. There are organizations out there that are collecting money to provide internet, broadband equipment. So do your homework and make sure you're giving to a reputable organization. But there certainly are nonprofits who have taken this on. There's also the option of political advocacy, supporting campaigns to provide public funding for this purpose. And then you have to decide, look at various measures on the ballot, whether they're tax measures or other things that would do this, and decide whether it's worth supporting those measures when you go to vote, and support people who are doing things in this area that you think are the right things, I guess. And I'm not going to pretend to say what those are. We have some good questions coming in online, but this next question is so good, I think it's something worth reading. So this is from Sherilyn Berger, who is looks like she's a licensed clinical social worker. Is there any funding actually available to retrofit existing public school buildings to provide for the installation of proper ventilation systems appropriate to the COVID-19 pandemic? And if not, how can we even consider reopening for physical in-place learning? It seems unconscionable, she says. Okay, now I could take that on. Paloma, you want to take a stab at this?
I don't know the answer to that, so yes, definitely take it on.
Okay, I think she knows more than she's letting on, but I'll take this one. Yes, there actually is funding for this. There is some funding available through the Federal CARES Act, and this past month ago. Now, there's also been funding from the state. In the case of LA Unified, they've had some school construction bond funds available, but of course, when they use them for this purpose, they're not available for other purposes later. And is it enough? Well, I mean, it's not as much as school districts say they need, although school districts, I think, are planning to open when they get the go-ahead. And it will be up to employees and their labor representatives to decide if school districts are doing enough. So the school districts say they need more. There has been some money provided for this from the state and federal government, and they're trying to make this money go as far as possible. And it's a work in progress. Now, as far as what are the kinds of things they're doing? Lots of things. They're putting, for example, high-grade filters on the air conditioning systems that are supposed to have as much filtering power as an N95 mask. So in essence, they're using the infrastructure of the buildings to actually make those buildings safer. Now, when you put, in essence, an N95 mask on an air conditioning system, that air conditioning system is not going to last as long because it has to work harder to pull the air through the system, but it's a sacrifice you make in the current time. And we will write about all of these issues ongoing, but it is a great question. Now, I'm going to pull some more questions that have been asked live, okay? So, Carney asked, how is LA Unified approaching special education? Now, I could take a stab at this, and then we'll see if Paloma wants to add something. Sadly, I think for many families, LA Unified failed really badly to provide special education. And I say that not necessarily to pick on LA Unified, because I think that a lot of districts were in exactly the same position. It's really hard to provide special services to students with special needs. Their special needs make Zoom a very difficult delivery system, and they were not doing things in person. And for students with disabilities, you had this additional issue of these individualized education plans, which were supposed to involve in-person meetings involving parents, teachers, and administrator and specialists who are experienced in helping that child's disability. Well, these meetings did not happen. They've got to catch up with these meetings, do them online. I think the district and other school districts are aware of this problem, and they know that they failed many families. And I think people are watching to see if they're going to do a better job. I think they're going to try to do a better job. And I think when you ask them honestly how well they did in the spring, I think they would say they didn't do very well. I don't think anybody, there were some schools, individual teachers, some districts that may have done well, but this was a big problem, and we're going to be watching this issue closely. Rion asks, how has the pandemic affected your work schedule as a reporter? Well, Paloma, how has it affected your schedule?
It is very challenging. Yeah, it's incredibly challenging to have to work from home with family obligations. Yeah, I don't know how else to say it. It's an incredibly challenging thing, but it's also not unique, right? Everyone I call, whenever I call people to interview them, their kids are in the background. They're dealing with the same challenges that I am. So in one sense, it's kind of been a good thing, right? It's to sort of, we're all in similar boats and can sort of understand each other. But yeah, it's an incredibly challenging time. The other challenge on top of that is not being able to go out and report and talk to people as much as we normally would, right? Not being able to like sit in on a physical classroom, not being able to just do as much of that in-person reporting that really makes stories come alive. So all of it is very challenging and different, and we're trying to adapt.
Right, and let me say that, Paloma, you have done a heroic job managing. I mean, Paloma has small children, and she's also married to a reporter. So I don't see how she does it. And when my children were small, my children are not small, so it's a lot easier for me. And one thing I actually like about it is that I don't have to commute to El Segundo from my house. El Segundo is where the LA Times is now located. But the Times make sure that I use that time I used to spend driving in my car. They make sure I use it all up, still working. So that's good, I guess. More bang for the buck. It is hard, but you know what? People have it harder than we do. There are people who are sick and dying, who don't have jobs, who are facing evictions. So My house has turned into a little office because one of my grown daughters has come here with her boyfriend. They both have jobs. They're doing their jobs online. We are battling for the internet and for streaming capability. But, given everything that's going on, we're pretty lucky. And it's also a privilege to be a reporter and to have the responsibility to try to make sense of the world and to tell people what's going on and to provide transparency. And I know that Paloma takes that responsibility very seriously. I hope we all do. And thank you for sticking with us as readers. All right, so now we have a question from, here's a good question. This is from Cynthia Levy. Are exceptions being made for private religious day schools to open in person this fall? I'll take that. The answer is technically no, but some of these religious day schools have repositioned themselves as childcare facilities where students are doing distance learning. And as soon as they are able to, they tend to apply for waivers to reopen. Now, there is some question about how well this is being handled. I mean, there's certainly a legal way to reposition yourself as a child care facility if you were formerly most identified as a school. We're looking into that issue and appreciate your ongoing help with that. So if you have tips to provide in this area about what schools are doing that we actually would like to hear about that because we are looking into that story, not from any preset agenda, but we are exploring that as reporters and looking at it from all angles. Anything to add to that, Paloma?
No, I think that's it. Yeah.
All right. Here's a question from Roya Mina. How do health department officials make sure that people who have tested positive, in fact, quarantine themselves? Now, let me preface that by saying that, that could be a question for a county health reporter, but it could come up in the context of schools because once schools reopen, we have the issue of what happens when there's a positive case. Any thoughts on that, Paloma?
I don't know the answer to that. I'd love to, Howard, if you know the answer to how that works from the health department's perspective, I'd love to hear that. I don't know.
I don't have any secret insights here, but let me say that I think a lot of this is on the honor system because I don't think any government agency is staffed to police whether people are in quarantine. I mean, at the moment, we cannot even test everybody that we need to test, and we cannot do contact tracing. And in fact, of course, that is why schools are not open right now. Those are the two of the things that are supposed to be in better condition before schools can open. So a lot of this is going to depend on people doing what they're supposed to be doing for the benefit of all. But follow the LA Times and the reporters who cover those issues specifically, and you might get more expert insights. So here's another question. How do you protect yourself while doing your job? How easy or difficult is it to get the full story without being amongst witnesses, etc.? Now, this is from Ruth Cameron, and I think, Paloma, you've answered this somewhat before. Is there anything you would add?
Yeah, I think I sort of talked about it a little bit earlier. I would just say that it's definitely a huge challenge. We do try to go out there and talk to people as much as possible, but it's not the same. It's not the same as just sort of easily going someplace and observing. We do try to take precautions. I have a mask. I try to stay at a distance where I can. And I also just try to think a lot about sort of the pros and cons of, is this a story where I need to go out and talk to a person in person, or would it be okay to do an interview by phone? So it's just a lot of sort of weighing what's the best thing to do in each situation.
Right, I have gone out a fair amount, and I have my mask, I have my gloves, hand sanitizer, I have everything in my car. I use it a lot. I try to be careful because it's important that we protect other people as well as ourselves. And it's been important to be out there, but I have to say that the risks that we take as reporters are nothing compared to the risks being taken by your average person who works in a grocery market, often for a minimum wage. They are face to face with people all day long, including some people with bad attitudes about safety precautions. So my heart goes out to all these people and the first responders. So technically, we are taking some risk. It is nothing compared to what other people are taking. And we have a company that's very supportive of telling us we do not have to take risk if we feel an assignment is too risky, and they want us to be careful. And that's not true of all employers. Here's a question from Cheryl Raskin. How have you adjusted to the dizzying news cycles? Does it still make sense to pitch various angles on hot topics, both related and unrelated to COVID-19, racial unrest, and the election? Paloma.
Yeah, I think that's such a great question. I don't know that I have adjusted. I feel like I'm still trying to sort of grapple with all of it. There's just so much going on that we're all trying to wrap our heads around. Um, I I do think I sort of talked about this a little bit earlier. I think part of it is really trying not to react to every immediate thing that happens or every immediate shift, and really trying to pull back as much as possible and think about and talk to people about, the big picture. How can we tell this story, um, uh, sort of looking at it from a distance, what the big issues are. Um, because if you're reacting to every change, it's really difficult. At the same time, there's a huge desire from people to get updates, right? Especially, like, I mean, Howard is the real expert on this, but all of the changes happening at the district level that are so important for parents and teachers and families to know about, um, you know, that responsibility of making sure you're on top of all of those things. It's a lot, because there's just so much uncertainty and so much change right now. So yeah, I don't know that I have a great answer, but I do really try as much as possible to sort of not react immediately to everything that changes, and try to step back and think about things, a little more broadly where I can.
Well, I think you do a great job at that. I've noticed that you have a special talent for kind of grasping the big picture. Does it make sense for people to pitch topics to us? Absolutely. We want it all. And by the way, I have many wonderful and somewhat impatient sources who are constantly getting on my case because, like, Howard, I told you about this great tip a month ago and you haven't done anything yet. Why aren't you writing about this issue? And I guess the answer is I'm trying. I'm trying to get to as many things as I can. And I know Paloma is doing this too. There are things that we cannot write about right now that we are still trying to keep track of and trying to write about it when we have the opportunity. And so please keep telling us these things, because it's really important for us to know what's going on and to have these great sources. So we do want to hear from you, and we try to get us to as much as we can. And there are always choices, and we try to make the best choices we can and cover topics that are important to many people and do it reasonably. And sometimes we do a better job than others, but I can tell you we're working really hard. That much I can tell you. So here's another question. Do you anticipate more coverage on homeschooling, distance learning, and about how concerns over health and safety will lead to more parents opting for homeschool? That question is from Trish McCall. Well, we've done a little bit on this, but I think there's a lot more to do about this. We recently wrote a story about education pods, and some of those people in education pods are not actually going back to school. Sometimes the education pod is about supplementary work for kids who are in school, and there's so many questions related to this, and it's something that we need to do more with. And by the way, I've gotten all the emails from vendors who are pushing their homeschooling solutions and softwares. Thank you very much. What I really need to hear from are people who are doing the work of homeschooling. We need sources in the homeschooling community and parents at the ground level doing this who don't have a commercial stake in this. And we definitely want to hear from you. Paloma, anything to add on this?
Yeah, I would just say, I would just echo that. Yes, absolutely. I think it's so important. And please reach out to us if you have ideas or thoughts on this, because, we have families all over the state coming up with their own sort of solutions to this. And some of that is, like Howard mentioned, some of that is strictly homeschooling, taking their kids out of school and just doing the homeschooling thing. Some of that is sort of trying to find a hybrid between homeschooling and having kids do distance learning through their schools. So I just think it's absolutely fascinating. It's something that we've never seen before, and I'm absolutely interested in digging more into that.
Here's a question from Edward Ewing, and he wants to know, why isn't there more scrutiny of the two biggest school districts as driving forces in the movement to close schools? And he is referring to San Diego Unified and LA Unified, which are the two largest school districts in the state. Both times they have preceded Newsom's executive order to close the schools and seem to be providing the governor with political cover. Okay, it sounds like Edward actually has an opinion on this subject already, but it's a reasonable question. And we have noticed in recent times that San Diego Unified and LA Unified have tried to act in concert on issues where they have common ground. Now, San Diego Unified and LA Unified are both very large school systems, although no district compares in size to LA Unified in California. So San Diego Unified is huge, but it's much different. Its demographics are also a little different than LA Unified. And yes, they have combined on some issues with the goal of adding to their clout. I mean, in some cases, both districts were calling for more guidance from state government than they felt they were getting. So in that case, they were not pushing Governor Newsom to do something specific, but just to tell them what to do. Did they announce closures? Well, LA Unified, yes. And in some cases, they've acted before the governor in closing schools or in not reopening schools. And they've definitely been in contact with the governor's office, but I guess they would say that they are trying to use their size to lobby on behalf of their students, many of whom are from low-income families, low-income minority families in many cases. And they see that as essentially doing their job. And when we say providing the governor with political cover, well, political cover to do what? If we're saying that Governor Newsom has a political agenda to close schools because it's politically advantageous to him, well, okay, maybe it's politically advantageous for the governor to be on television whenever he wants with the latest pandemic update. It's certainly given him a high profile that he hasn't had before, but it is a double-edged sword when things are going well and in California related to the pandemic, and that's great for Gavin Newsom. And yes, he does have a command of facts and figures, and in some ways this crisis has shown off what, quote unquote, what he can do. But when things are not going so well, that doesn't go so well for him. So it's whether it helps him or hurts him depends on the situation of the moment. I think San Diego and LA Unified want to do what they feel is in their best interest, and if they can get the governor working in concert with them, they see that as a good thing. Anything you would add to that, Paloma? I'm taking that as a no. Let's see. We have a question from Sarah Shapiro here. What kind of training will teachers get for online learning? Paloma, are you with us? We may have lost Paloma momentarily, so I'm going to take this question. And with any luck, we will get Paloma back on. And as soon as we see her, oh, you're there.
I'm back.
Okay. I was lost without you. You know, and that's a metaphor for the way my reporting life works as well. What can we say about what kind of training teachers are getting from learning?
I'm sorry, it's sort of breaking up on my end. I can't hear that question.
Okay. What kind of training will teachers get for online learning? Is there anything we can say about that?
I mean, as far as I know, there's been training going on since March for teachers, and there has been a concerted effort to get teachers more comfortable with online learning, to help them get more fluency with the platforms. But it also varies from district to district. Some districts have had more intense training, some less so. Howard, I don't know if you have any thoughts you want to add to that.
Well, I think that mostly covers it. I think that LA Unified, for example, tried to get some basic online training for teachers right away as soon as schools closed, and they also offered supplementary online training for teachers in the spring. And online training is part of the plan in LA Unified and districts up and down the state. It is a heavy lift for teachers, and some are more native to that environment than others. I mean, again, they did not sign up to teach in this way, just as they did not sign up to be frontline people and first responders and essential workers and all that, and put themselves at risk in that way. As you pointed out, some districts have done a better job of this than others. There's some criticism in LA Unified that the district and the teachers have not left enough time in their work week for ongoing professional development. That is a criticism that some people have levied. And so they feel that there needs to be more time that teachers are setting aside for this. And in fact, they want to see a longer teacher work week to allow for this, because in fact, the online school day is a little shorter than the traditional school day. So we'll see how that develops. Now, here's a great question from Nancy Nyberg. She wants to know what is being done for arts education. When will teaching artists join virtual education for the fall 2020 semester? I'm going to add this. Paloma, have you thought about this in connection with your own kids? Some of those like added things that happen in school besides reading and writing that make the school exciting for students to go to that they've lost. I mean, I'm sure that's something you've experienced as a parent yourself.
I think we're just trying to get through the basics. At some point, we'll start thinking about arts and extracurricular, but for now, it's largely basics.
Well, I mean, the arts education thing is a great question, because it does underscore that it's really hard to do arts education. I mean, it's certainly, even when kids go back to school, there's question about how you can do choir, how you can do sports. And a lot of the things that bring school to life for students are these other things. So a child may do drama and stick around for math and English, but if they don't have that drama, if they don't have that basketball team or the football team or something at school that they're excited about, then it's harder for them to get through the things that they aren't as excited about. And of course, we want school students to be excited by learning English and history, and we hope they are, and then that will be engaging. But the arts education and things like that are important, and that's an open question. And I actually hope that's something that we can look at more in our coverage. LA Unified has been experimenting with things that would make education more engaging. They've been doing online ukulele lessons, for example, in which ukuleles have been delivered to students' houses. So that's something they've been trying to do. Because obviously, educators are aware of this problem, that just staring at a Zoom screen for all day is not very engaging for students. And that's one of the reasons why a lot of students kind of checked out. And it's an ongoing thing. So I hope that's something we write about more. Here's a question. If this is even an option, how does one become an online tutor for LAUSD, and this person has passed their CBEST exam, which is what teachers typically have to pass before they earn their teaching credential? That's from Luisa Guerci. And let me just quickly say that there are nonprofit tutoring operations being set up. We are writing about that. We are reporting on that issue. You also can contact LA Unified. They are trying to organize something. And if you can't make a connection through LA Unified, there will be other opportunities. And keep reading our stories. We are going to be writing about that. All right, here's a question of special education, but we've answered that. Here's a question. Alia Henson. She wants to know, if smaller schools with K-6 can socially distance, why can't California provide them an ability to open? We have talked about that, but maybe you can reiterate some of those points, Paloma.
Yeah, I mean, I think that what Howard talked about earlier is largely the answer to that question, right? It sort of has to do with what the health experts are determining is the safest thing to do at this time. And we'll see how that changes as the situation changes over time.
There are a few examples of schools in California that are in areas where they are allowed to open, that have successfully applied to waivers or have opened. and we are looking at their experience. We had an article in the paper the other day about that. And certainly the first schools that might be able to open are likely to be elementary schools, because we know that, well, the science is always evolving on this, but it appears that there is less risk for small children. We don't know clearly if they can transmit the infection as easily as older students. There's some research which suggests they can't, but this is still an open question, according to what the epidemiologists are telling us. Anyway, here's a question from Jesus Quinones. How many districts, if any, have developed robust student and staff testing and tracing protocols? I guess I'll take this one. Well, the answer is we don't know for certain, but that is a work in progress. I think, you know, it depends on what you mean by robust, right? I don't think that a lot of the employee groups, the unions, feel that the protocols are robust enough. And as far as testing and tracing, I mean, LA School Superintendent Austin Buhner says there isn't nearly enough testing and tracing to make it safe to return to school. And he doesn't feel that LA Unify should be taking the lead on testing and tracing, because that's not what school districts do. He would like to see more leadership from the state and county on this issue. I hate to speak for the superintendent, but we've talked about this a number of times. So I feel safe in going that far about how he feels about it. And our district's working on this. They are, but they are working on making schools as safe as they can. And once somebody tests positive, then as far as testing and tracing protocols, I think there's still work being done on that, and work that needs to be done. So unless Paloma wants to add something, we will go on to the next question. This is from...
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Christy Ritter. Will it be too difficult and expensive to open schools and colleges next semester in January 2021? Well, I think we've sort of covered this. Yes, it will be difficult. Yes, it will be expensive. Will it be too expensive? I don't, if if health conditions otherwise are looking promising, I think it's pretty clear that they're going to give it a try. And I don't know what else to say about that we haven't already said. How do you remain objective, let alone write objectively, while experiencing internal continuous face palming? That question from Jay Tightsoul. Paloma.
I do a lot of face palming, but it's in reaction to a lot of different things. I don't know. I mean, that's the job, right? It's talking to as many people from different perspectives, different experiences as possible, and listening to them, and really, really genuinely trying to understand and hear their perspectives, because otherwise it's a disservice to our readers. You know, if we are just sort of angry at something and, you know, want to tell that story from our own perspective, that's not really the job. You know, I really, really believe that we also do better stories when we really listen to people, when we try to hear from a wide variety of experiences and perspectives, why things are happening the way they are. That's just, it just makes for stories that are more nuanced, and at the end of the day that better reflect reality, I think.
I think that's a great way to say it. Some people write into me saying, I just read your latest column, and I sometimes when I say, well, I don't write a column, I write news, and sometimes people find that, you know, the way I structure a news story, they don't find it to be objective, or they find it to be leaning one way or another. I mean, it's not for lack of trying. We try to be fair, and fairness is not always writing things 50-50. If you know somebody on one side is not telling the truth, then you should point that out. And there are lots of examples of this that I won't go into, but I also want to say face palming was not something, a term that I had really known a lot before. I'm glad that Paloma knew about it. My knowledge of slang and up-to-date terms kind of peaked in about 1985. And sometimes I go backwards in my cultural knowledge rather than forward, but you know, thank you for that. And also thank you for all things that I try to be a learner here because I have so much to learn. Okay, so believe it or not, we are nearing the end of our time. We'll take a couple more questions here. This is really one that we've sort of answered or we're not qualified to answer, but I will ask it because it is something people keep asking. What is the projection for when numbers will be low enough for LA Unified to open again safely? And that looks like Pat Chow is the name. And I guess what I would say to this is that you have to look at the state guidelines. And what the state is saying is that you have to have 14 days when your county is off this watch list. And the trend numbers also have to be going in the correct direction. And at that point, you can begin looking at opening up safely. And I think school districts want to be ready to open when that happens, although we do expect that some will open before others and some will apply for waivers for their elementary schools or some elementary schools, while others are going to wait and not do the waiver process. They're going to wait for a county-wide determination. But tune in to those projections about whether the county is on the watch list and wait for those 14 days to pass and look at the trend lines. And as far as the factors that put a county on the watch list, well, we won't go into that. That's probably for our health reporters, but they are out there and they're on the state and the LA Times website if you want to look at that. Here's a question. This is from Seping Chow. And how can parents be heard? Wow, that's a difficult question to know where to go with. A quick answer to that one, Paloma?
Wow, I think that's such an important question. I mean, I guess, yeah, I feel like a lot of parents feel like they're not being heard in this moment, right? That parents are dealing with so much, and that these decisions are being made above them that they don't really have input on. And I don't know the best solution to that, honestly. I know that some parents are trying to organize and group together so that they can, advocate for certain positions, especially within different school districts. It always helps to reach out to reporters if there's something that's going on that you think needs attention. It's always helpful to reach out to the media and try to get attention that way. But yeah, I don't know. I empathize a lot with that question because I do feel so much for parents dealing with all of these decisions that are being made, and not always feeling like they have the input that they want to have on those decisions.
Well, I think you had some good ideas, though, in that. Although I have to say, when people reach out to us, we only get to a small percentage of the stories that we want to, but we try. What if this is the last question? What if children do not have access to the internet? What kind of support is offered? I'll take a first stab at this, and then we'll let Paloma add to this. One thing is, all districts are not created equal, and some are providing more than other districts, but you should absolutely contact your teacher, contact your school, contact the school district, your school board member. I mean, most schools and school districts have things to do to help you. It may or may not be successful, but you need to try to go through those channels. Now, we also want to know, because we are writing about these stories when families are not getting the internet, when they're not getting computers, we need to know as well. So don't just tell us, but please do tell us, as we are writing stories about that constantly, as we want to find out what the situation is and do a temperature check on this. But most school districts are trying to fill in this gap, and make sure you're in contact with them. So Paloma, last words on this or anything else?
Yeah, I think that's really it. Districts are trying different ways to get students internet access, so reach out to them. And I would also say that the LA Times worked on a really big survey of school districts, looking at some of these issues about how districts have tried to address internet access, computer access, as well as student engagement. And that's a story that's going to be coming out tomorrow. So if you want to know a little bit more about how this has played out, definitely look for that story tomorrow.
Darn it, I meant to ask you about that first. I've buried the lead. We have a huge package that Paloma did a brilliant job on, I might say, and it is looking at, it's a distance learning. We surveyed 45 school districts, a million that cover 1.5 million students, and it is an exclusive, an LA Times exclusive. It is looking at the state of distance learning in the spring, the foreboding aspects, everything that did not go right, and what that means for the fall. So I should have done that at the top of the show. So my apologies to everybody, but the whole education team was involved. And please tune in, look at the LA Times for that story. It's some great work by my colleagues, and it raises some troubling questions as we move forward. But that is an example of the kind of work we want to do here. And we'd love to hear your feedback from that about that major story, and certainly your experience, because we cannot do this without you, and we do this for you. So you are an essential part of the equation. And I also want to say how much I love working with Paloma and the other members of our education team and our editor, Stephanie Chavez. And I think, Paloma, any final words?
No, just thank you everyone for tuning in. We really appreciate it. Please do reach out when you want to talk, or you have issues that you want us to be aware of. And yeah, just thank you. And thank you, Howard, who does the most amazing job covering LAUSD and education. It's just incredible.
Well, thank you for that. And again, thanks to all of you, thanks to everyone out there for reading the paper, and good luck in all the struggles that you're going through right now. It is a tough time. And that is all for this particular Ask the Reporter session. Again, thanks for tuning in.